Thank you for the opportunity to check in with you this morning regarding the housing option study and action plan. Before I turn it over to Jackie Camp and Jenna, who is a project manager on this, just want to quickly, in terms of background, this is a continuation of the housing innovation work that the planning department and council worked on, I believe, a few years ago. That work started with a revision to the existing county code. We started with revision to the accessory dwelling unit, which in the urban area eliminated the provision for owner occupancy requirement, and also some amendment to deal with the parking issue. That owner requirement is very, very difficult to implement, and that's why we made the change to no longer require owner occupancy for ADU in the urban area. As part of that work, we also made changes to our code requiring tiny houses, manufactured homes, and also amendment to our cottage housing code. As part of that initial work, we also provided for allowing attached accessory dwelling unit in the rural area, and that was the first in Clark County. So we came to the council requesting to continue the housing option study and action plan, focusing on affordable housing issues and where opportunities may exist to make some changes. So today, we want to check in with you to share with you what we have learned through the analysis done by our consultant. So with that, I will turn it over to Jackie, who will introduce our consultant, and they will be part of giving the presentation today. So Jackie, go ahead. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Oliver.
We are here to answer questions that you may have. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, councillors.
Okay, good morning, councillors and county manager. My name is Jackie Camp with Community Planning. So the purpose of this work session is to provide an update to council on the Housing Option Study and Action Plan project. This is the first check-in with council since the project advisory group convened on January 26th. I also want to say thank you to Councillor Olson for participating as the council liaison for this group. The project staff want to understand today any key council questions, concerns, or ideas at this point in the project to bring back to the advisory group and our team to inform the next phase of our work. Presenting today are three members of the consultant team. We have Steve Faust, he's the overall project manager from 3J Consulting, Tyler Bump from Echo Northwest, and Elizabeth Decker from Jet Planning. Next slide, please. Oh, and I must also say Jenna's here with us. Jenna Kay and I were both project managing this project. So to provide a bit of background on the progress of the project from its inception, this slide provides the various work sessions, meetings, and hearing dates and topics we've had with council starting back in October 2019, which I think Oliver had mentioned. So that was when we kind of began to talk about this project and how it could be scoped. We had our council hearing in March to approve the consultant contract with scope of work on the 24th of March last year. September, we provided council an update on the stakeholder interview process, which was the first kind of task of the project to kind of understand the key issues of housing in the project area. And that also included a draft of the public participation plan that was then heard at hearing on November 30th, which also included the list of project advisory representation positions. January 5th of this year was when those advisory group member appointments were officially approved. And then the group began meeting on January 26th. Next slide, please. The purpose of the housing option study and action plan is to understand our local housing challenges and identify opportunities to encourage creation of additional housing types that are affordable to a variety of households within the unincorporated Vancouver urban growth area. This can be done through the removal of regulatory barriers and/or implementation of other strategies. The project advisory group was appointed to provide input throughout the project and assist with developing recommendations to present to the public, planning commission, and county council. To date, the advisory group has met 3 times. Next slide. There are 5 major phases of this project as scoped, which include understanding the issues, which was included the stakeholder interview process, which we shared with you in October, but we'll also summarize again today. A review and analysis phase, which is the housing data collection and analysis, as well as the land use policy, zoning, and regulation audit, which we will talk about today. Followed by the following phase will be recommendation development, followed by preparation of the action plan, and finally the legislative process. The project is currently in phase 2, the review and analysis phase, and we'll be moving into phase 3 next. So that's the recommendation development. The presentation today will provide a summary of what the project advisory group has heard to date, which includes the stakeholder interview process, the data collection and analysis work, and the land use policies, zoning, and regulation audit report. So we have a lot to cover, but before I pass it over to Steve for the next piece of the presentation, is there any questions I can answer?
Questions of the council? Don't see any yet. Thanks, Jen.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Steve, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, counselors. Good morning. We really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you this morning about this project. As Jackie mentioned, one of our very first tasks was to identify the full range of issues related to housing within the study area and understand the different perspectives among key stakeholders that represent a variety of expertise on housing. You can go to the next slide. And then the next one. Perfect, thank you. So between April and July of 2020, our team connected with approximately 70 stakeholders through video and phone interviews, a focus group with real estate brokers, and an online questionnaire for some of the stakeholders that we couldn't connect with by phone or video. And this table illustrates the various groups that we were able to connect with through our outreach. Like I said, about 70 stakeholders in all. Next slide, please. So our outreach touched on a number of key issues that are documented in the summary report. And these include prevalent housing types being constructed in recent years in the study area, zoning in the study area as it relates to development patterns, the land supply, limited land supply and at times constricted, infrastructure needs, the development review process, impact and development fees, design standards and their implications, where needed housing should be located, parking requirements and impacts, affordable housing incentives, the public perception of housing types other than single-family detached dwellings, and concerns about displacement around naturally occurring affordable housing. So that's the broad range of topics that we touched on, and our charge was really to document everything we heard, not just kind of the common themes, but everything we heard from our stakeholder interviews and those other outreach methods that I mentioned in the last slide. But for the purposes of our limited time today, if we could go to the next slide, within those broader themes and all the opinions that are documented in the summary report, there are a few common issues and common themes that we heard that I'll just cover briefly here. One is many interviewees commented that the predominant construction is for single-family detached dwellings, and that does not necessarily reflect the entirety of needs within the county and within our study area. As our market analysis notes, there are a variety of housing needs across a spectrum of household incomes that cannot be met fully by single-family detached dwellings. Stakeholders also note that zoning designations in some places are restrictive and maybe and possibly not located in the right places, such as allowing higher density development along major transportation corridors or near commercial uses. Interviewees also say that land availability is one of the most difficult challenges in the county. We heard that land is scarce, and where it is available, parcels are not always contiguous or are oftentimes encumbered by environmental constraints. There seems to be a disconnect, according to our respondents, between infrastructure investment and where new housing is expected to be developed, and at times a lag between new housing development and the provision of the infrastructure needed to serve it, and roads were mentioned most frequently. Several interviewees stated that the review and permitting process appears to be heavily siloed, and that there are at times communication problems between county departments that cause lengthy delays and therefore costly delays. Some of the stakeholders commented that impact and development fees are high and not necessarily scaled to support the development of housing types with smaller footprints. And again, just a reminder, these themes were not unanimous among our stakeholders, but they did stand out as ones that were more commonly cited. And then finally, some stakeholders stressed the importance of an equitable approach to the regulation of all housing types and not favoring or disproportionately affecting any one particular housing type. So that is a brief summary of what we heard through all of our outreach in the first phase of the project. Before we move on to the next segment of our presentation, I'll pause to see if there are any questions.
I have a question. When it comes to, I know you made a statement, the single family residence, of course, doesn't meet everyone's needs. However, if you look at what has been developed recently in Clark County, City of Vancouver particularly, there are lots of multifamily opportunities. Was that taken into account? I mean, I don't like hearing that single family residences now well, maybe I'm assuming that making that statement or hearing that statement is going to reflect upon and result in fewer single family homes being built. Is that the case?
No, I don't think so. I think number one, remember, these are the observations of the people that we interviewed. At this point, we're not talking about our quantitative research. And the City of Vancouver, right, is not, we're talking about the unincorporated area as well. And these are people's perceptions of what has been developed over time. I'm not sure if Tyler will touch on this in his presentation, but with the advisory group, we did talk quite a bit about the fact that, yeah, there is still a need for single family detached homes on one end of the spectrum of housing needs. They're just not meeting the full spectrum of needs of all household incomes. So I don't think that this observation from our stakeholders is going to lead directly to some reduction in single family detached housing development. It's just acknowledging that the needs go beyond those types of units.
Okay, thank you. And then one other thing that I notice is land supply is constrained and encumbered. I realize that it is constrained and encumbered, and one way that happens is through our land use and our vacant buildable lands model, for instance. So part of that is also a policy issue, because we do have land. We have a lot of land in the rural areas of unincorporated Clark County. So Just making that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move to the next segment of our presentation? Okay, then I will hand it over to Tyler Bump from Echo Northwest.
Thank you, Steve. And good morning, counselors. Can everybody hear me okay? We're good? All right. My name is Tyler Bump. I'm a project director at Echo Northwest. Waiting on this PowerPoint presentation. Rebecca, could you please move the slide forward for me? There we go. Thank you. Today I'm going to talk about some of our high-level summary findings from our housing inventory and analysis report that we've written to support the housing action plan in this project. There is a whole lot of information and data that's located in this report, and you have the ability to go as deep as you choose in looking at this information. But I'm covering the important sort of high notes that have come up in the project advisory group meetings, that have come up in some of the stakeholder comments, and that staff really wanted to share with you all today. So I will jump into that. Building off of, I think, where the question and conversation was off of Steve's portion of the presentation, one of the things that we've looked at is the composition of existing housing across the unincorporated portions of the Vancouver UGA. And what we found is that the majority of housing in the study area, 76%, is currently today detached single-family housing. Multifamily housing is the next highest amount of housing at 13%. So the vast majority of housing is currently detached single family, and higher rates of detached single family in the study area, the unincorporated UGA, than in Clark County as a whole. So Clark County has a smaller share of single family detached housing, a higher share of both multifamily, and notably a higher share of this attached, single family attached category as well, which just isn't as predominant in the unincorporated portions of the county. The other thing that we looked at is the housing units by lot size. So looking at existing lot size, or really efficiency of land for single family detached housing and single family attached housing. And the majority of parcels you can see in this lot size distribution chart on the right hand side of your screen are in 5,000 square foot lots and above, and a pretty limited amount of housing that's currently built out, single family detached housing and attached housing that's currently built on 5,000 square foot or smaller lots across the unincorporated portions of the county. Next slide, please. One of the other things that we've done, and this is to get a sense of, we've looked at employment growth by industries, and one of the other things that we really want to look at is the transportation connection between residential options and employment within the region. And so what we've looked at here is the mode split, essentially how people get to work or commute to work from the study area. And the vast majority of folks, both in the unincorporated Vancouver UGA as well as Clark County, commute by car. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a map of what we've looked at as a 45-minute travel time of a car trip during peak hour and a transit trip during peak hour service using Google Maps information, what's called GTFS data from both CTran and TriMet on the transit side here as well. Next slide, please. So one of the sort of key things that has come up in conversations with stakeholders, as well as what the advisory group, is really the changes in the affordability levels or attainability of housing across really the region, and interesting specific points here in the unincorporated Vancouver UGA as well. On the left-hand side shows trends in sales prices per square foot of lot area. This is meant to indicate the changes over time and affordability of homeownership. I will tell you right now, when we last pulled information of listings, which was the fourth quarter of 2020, the majority of single-family detached ownership units in the Vancouver UGA were priced between $400,000 and $450,000, and the price and asking points of single-family and ownership housing broadly across Clark County has increased pretty quickly, as you all read on a pretty regular basis in the Columbian, and that is observed in the data that we're looking at here as well. The other thing that we've looked at is changes in rent over time. And so on the right-hand side of this chart, you can see the average asking rent for a 1-bedroom in the solid blue line, and average asking rent for a 2-bedroom unit in the yellow line, and a similar, pretty rapid increase in rental prices for 1 and 2-bedroom units across the Vancouver UGA as well. Next slide, please, Rebecca, whenever you get a chance. Thank you. So one of the things that we're looking at is the changes from 2012 to 2019 and what's been happening. So wages have increased by 12%. So the compensation or the household incomes and wages for residents within the Vancouver UGA have increased 12% since 2012. Rents have increased 23%, and the average home sales price on a per lot square foot basis that we're looking at has increased 95%. So the dynamics that we're seeing in Clark County that are felt throughout the region and are starting to happen at a really quicker pace, honestly, in Clark County than compared to other parts of the Portland, Vancouver region are pretty stark in the cost of housing, increases in cost of housing relative to compensation and wages. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that we looked at is the income profile or the income distribution of households within the UGA and compare that to Clark County. So in the unincorporated Vancouver UGA, almost 47% of the households make more than 120% AMI. And AMI is a area median income that we use as a comparison across different household types. 100% AMI as a point of reference in the region, which is, again, the Portland, Vancouver region defined by HUD and the Census Bureau, is about $88,000 per year. So 120% is 120% of that $88,000 per year. So the vast majority of folks well, 47% of households in the unincorporated Vancouver UGA make more than 120% AMI. And these are folks that are at the upper end of the middle income spectrum all the way up to higher income households. But there's also a broad distribution of households in the lower income categories, specifically in this 50 to 80% AMI category, in both the Vancouver UGA and Clark County as well. The other thing that we looked at is cost burdening, and cost burdening is a way for us to look at really housing affordability relative to household incomes. So a household's identified as cost burdened when they spend more than 30% of their monthly income on housing costs. And what we found is that for renters, especially in the Vancouver UGA, is 44% of renters spend more than 30% of their monthly household income on rents. And also a large share of those are severely cost burdened. So almost 7,000 households that spend more than 50%, renter households that spend more than 50% of their monthly household income on rent. And then a share that are home ownership cost burdened as well. And there's some different dynamics that happen between cost burdening for homeowners and cost burdening for renters. From a policy perspective, we usually kind of look at cost burdening on the renter side as an indicator of affordability here. Next slide, please. One of the other things we looked at was household sizes relative to the housing stock, in the UGA. And this is a really interesting one because what we're finding is that the largest category of households is 2-person households throughout the Vancouver UGA, but the largest share of housing units are in 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom units. So we've got a lot of smaller households. You can see on the left-hand side in the yellow bars here, so 1-person households and 2-person households making up about 50% of the total households in the Vancouver UGA. At the same time, you have about 70% of the total housing stock that's 3- and 4-bedroom units throughout the Vancouver UGA as well. So you've got a lot more bigger units and a lot more smaller households. These are trends that are happening across the country as households are shrinking, household size is shrinking, folks are aging in place, people are, kids are leaving, but this is happening in Clark County and the Vancouver UGA as well. Next slide, please. The last thing that we've done here is forecast out housing needs by income category for the Vancouver UGA. And the basis that we use here is the comprehensive plan population forecast. And so we take that population forecast and apply household size and different income categories and forecast that out. And what we've identified is a need of a little over 13,000 housing units by 2035 to meet what is current need and future need through by 2035, and broken that out by income category as well. So about 42% of the needed housing is at income levels below 100% AMI, while 58% is at income levels above 100% AMI. And as a reference to the housing types that we were talking about earlier and the price point, so single family detached housing in the UGA and in Clark County right now is about, say, 120% to 140% AMI in terms of affordability level of single family detached housing. Current rental rates for two bedroom units across the Vancouver UGA are about 60% of AMI. And so to give you some sense of housing type and tenure and how that relates to affordability and the decisions that you all can make moving forward to meet housing need at different income levels. And I think that's all I have, and we'll open it up for questions.
Questions of council?
Madam Chair? Councilor Olson? Yeah, Madam Chair.
Councilor Olson, yeah, okay,
That's
go
okay,
ahead.
thank you. So just looking at this slide here, you mentioned the 13,281 units by 2035 based on our comprehensive plan. And so that's based on the existing comp plan and older population estimates, correct?
They're adopted acknowledged population estimates. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so likely that is an underestimate of what we're going to need going forward, considering our population is growing at 2+% each year and has for a while now. So how do we're not going to adopt a new comp plan until probably 2024, but we know what's happening on the ground. So how do we accommodate for the difference in what the comp plan says and what we know is really happening?
Sure, that's a great question. So there's a couple things that we did. We wanted to intentionally use the adopted acknowledged comprehensive plan numbers to be consistent with your long range policy. Like on its face, we wanted to do that. What we've also done is account for what we call current underproduction. So about 20% of this total is housing units that are needed today. The rate of population growth and household growth has increased above what we would call a normal healthy housing production rate. And so we have accounted for current underproduction in this total. So it's a combination of the population forecast in the comprehensive plan, as well as existing housing shortage today. And the reason that we do that is because we know that Clark County has grown and continues to grow very quickly. And that if we work from a place of deficit, that we're always working from a place of deficit moving forward into the future. So we do account for that current underproduction in these totals as well. It's I think for you all sort of decision making or your comprehensive plan update process, when you go through that, there's an opportunity to update this information with more recent population estimates whenever you all make that decision and adopt those numbers. But we did want to be consistent with the current adopted plan right now.
Okay, thank you. And then if we could go back to the other slide before, I just had a couple questions on, like, when we talk about population growth and household size, do we know or do we have any sense of the age groups that are kind of populating Clark County right now? I mean, how many people are moving in that are retired? What's the millennial population look like as they're looking to maybe move out of the cities and into the more suburban and rural areas? Do we have a sense of that?
We do. We have a section in the, trying to find it right now, in the report itself. So one interesting thing is that within the study area, 14% of residents are 65 or older right now, and that 40% of residents in the study area are between 40 and 64 years old. And I think what we're finding in the data is really where Clark County and the study area, the UGA, fit within the broader regional housing context, is that a lot of folks are sort of in their, we would call them prime earning years, honestly, later in their careers, the 40 to 64-year-old category. Some of those folks have children, some of them don't have children. But in general, the majority of folks are in this, households are in this 40 to 64-year-old or population in the 40 to 64-year-old category. I think in terms of housing options and different housing types to satisfy the need of current residents, one thing that we have heard consistently across the region is the need for housing options for folks to age in place. So of the 14% of residents that are over 65 that are in 3 or 4 bedroom units on a 10,000 square foot lot, That's a large single-family detached house to maintain as folks get older over time. So, you know, things will continue to change, trends will continue to change. I think the impact of COVID and people's decision-making and behaviors will be interesting to look back in a couple of years from now, but we don't have enough data to point to yet about household composition or age or anything like that based on COVID.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Madam Chair, one of
Go
the
ahead, Councilman.
Councilor Olson's questions. So the first, a little bit separate. What is the linkage right now between what you're working on and our county's buildable plans project that's ongoing? I mean, obviously some of the projected shortages that you have are going to be directly informing and directly linked to what we're doing with our comp plan as we move forward. What is the best way to link your work with the county's work and our consultants' work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer from my perspective and then kick it over to staff about process and the two projects together. But I think one of the values of having us on this team supporting Steve and 3J in the county is that we are working on the VBLM project as well. I'm not staffing that myself, but I am coordinating with my colleagues, Bob Parker and Becky Hewitt, who are leading that work. And so we have had that opportunity to coordinate between these projects, at least at a consultant level. In terms of how they align, I'd have maybe Jackie or Jenna talk about that.
Yes, great question. So we're definitely coordinating as community planning is managing both projects. So there's definitely a connection and keeping track on both projects together. And then the end result of the VBLM, the actual buildable lands report, right, that will be updated. The goal would be if whatever may come out of some of the work that's done with this project to help inform also pieces of the buildable lands report and related to housing and affordability. So definite connection. I don't know if Oliver wants to add anything else to those two projects.
No, Jackie, you summarized it very well. There's going to be a linkage, whatever that linkage is going to be both on the supply side and housing affordability issues. There are other issues that, other policy issues that the council will be addressing as we move forward, but both projects will inform the council on future decisions, one on population to plan for, and then the land supply to, or whether the sizing of urban growth boundary to accommodate that growth. So those are going to be linked. And then how to address affordable housing affordability issue, all that is going to be linked. And that is why the two projects are very key in informing the council as we move forward.
Hey, does that answer your question, Counselor?
Yes, I did have another question though, if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
And I had accidentally muted myself. These slides are, to me, very dramatic, especially the slide in how wages stayed with very little growth and home prices went up 90%. And, you know, those are challenges that aren't insurmountable. I mean, it's all about balance and trying to figure this out as to how to get to affordable housing. But I'm wondering, is there a way to better depict the shortage in each category of housing, not only currently, but projected, you know, because we do have, you know, an obligation to provide for all lifestyles, single family homes as well as apartment living. We need to get to affordable housing, and obviously the challenge is dramatic. But is there a way to depict it for each category where we're at as far as current shortage versus a projected shortage?
I think we could that's a really great question. And I'm not sure how well we can do that with any level of accuracy, given how quickly things are changing, to be honest with you. But I think, you know, the way that we've thought about these housing forecast numbers, both from the underproduction side as well as the population growth side, is that there's a need across different income categories, and that the policy choice really rests with you all as decision makers and staff and the community about how to address these. And there are some regulatory approaches that could and should be taken. There are some programmatic and funding approaches that could and should be taken that are both local, state, and federal around funding, especially at the lower income categories. And so really what we're doing is identifying, again, and it does look pretty stark for sure, but we're identifying the challenge. And then as part of this project, helping you all understand what some of the solutions can be. Not that there's going to be a solution or you can fix everything for every income category, but identifying what some of those options are so you all can wrestle with the trade-offs of the policy, regulatory, and programmatic funding options to get there.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Bowman.
Just a moment ago, Tyler, you mentioned that we, of course, don't know the effects of COVID yet on housing demands. And I guess that everybody nationally is trying to grapple with that now. I noticed two articles, one in Governing and one in the Wall Street Journal just this week on that very topic. And it kind of speaks to that one slide, well, I believe it's up right now, that you have on the 1 and 2 person households compared to the stock that is available in 3 and 4 bedroom units. And the comment in the articles was that with COVID, there is a noticeable trend for people, regardless of the number of people in the household, to be looking for not just units with additional bedrooms beyond what might be expected by some analyst somewhere, but people are asking for more bedrooms and more square footage and more single family homes so that they have that sense of privacy, presumably because of the need in some cases for people to work from home. So I think it is having a very important effect on housing demand. That is something that I too think that we need to keep an eye on.
I agree. It'll be interesting to see where this lands. I think part of the crunch that's happening in the housing market in Clark County is because your housing stock is part of the things that a lot of folks are looking for in this current COVID world of, you know, having some outdoor space and having some of these things. That's not going to go away, right? Not all housing demand is going to say, you know, we all want to live in townhomes, we all want to live in multifamily housing. I think the thing that we want to sort of communicate here is that there's a diversity of housing needs and a diversity of housing demand. Some of that is going to continue to be on, you know, detached single family housing that's reflective of the current stock today, but increasingly there's demand for different options beyond that too. And so I think it's the blend of both of those things. And certainly Clark County within the region is pretty unique, honestly, compared to other jurisdictions within the region too, about what your housing stock looks like, proximity to job centers, all other things that are attributes and community attributes for Clark County as well.
Madam Chair.
Councilor
Land. Thank you for this. I had a question about the naturally occurring affordable housing that you referenced in the data analysis. I guess my question is about wondering whether these are reliable for us to count on. So the naturally occurring affordable housing being affordable housing for these lower portions of the AMI, 50 to 80%, that are not government regulated necessarily. And we have about, I think it said about 25% of our county's NOAA units are in this study area. And I'm wondering about the age and condition, if you touched on that at all. If I didn't see it in the report. Anecdotally, a lot of that, what I would presume is naturally occurring affordable housing, is not necessarily in the best condition. And I'm wondering if that, if we're at risk of losing those as well?
You know, I think there's not a lot of great data on quality of a lot of these, and absent some sort of reporting or condition assessment for a lot of these naturally occurring affordable units, it's hard to know for sure. So I don't necessarily want to speculate too much, but in general, these are older multifamily units that are in the naturally occurring affordable housing stock. That in other parts of the region and in Clark County and parts of Clark County, we have seen that some of these are most at risk for what we call repositioning. So, you know, you make some improvements to the units, you add new roof, new siding, new paint, new windows, and because of those costs, rents go up to be able to cover those costs. But there is a value add component from an investment perspective to some of the older multifamily housing stock. So usually in some of our recommendations, when we see a large share of naturally occurring affordable housing like this, is we do talk about some sort of preservation approach or thinking about a preservation strategy. And again, we're in the needs part of this. We're not, you know, yet in the recommendations part, but certainly if those are concerns that folks have, and thinking about preservation of, you know, the market rate affordable or naturally occurring affordable housing has been part of the discussions and other housing action plans we're working on across Washington right now.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions before we move on? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move to Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning. If we could advance a few slides ahead, please. Thanks.
Yes, and good morning, counselors. Thank you for having us. Elizabeth Decker, I'm with Jet Planning, and my background is in zoning and policy work. And so I'm here to talk to you today about what we're finding when we look at, you know, the whole suite of long range and current planning options that the county is applying to housing, and, you know, looking at how that might impact what housing options are available and what might be available going forward. So if you could advance a little, please. We wanted to design this audit and, you know, review to really look expansively at what is happening right now in the county, and from the, you know, all of the long range land use plans, starting, you know, like good classical planners with a comprehensive plan, and then look at how that gets implemented through the development regulations and zoning maps on the ground. You know, given that we had a lot on our plate that way, we did not want to spend our time looking at some of the development standards around critical areas, environmental regulations, public improvements, building code. Those are, you know, more technical issues, and we really have less scope to address them in this project, which isn't to say that they aren't as important, if not more important, in terms of what gets built, how they impact housing, but they just, you know, aren't our main focus with this project. So in looking at those plans and regulations, what we wanted to start off with, you know, as we're getting this project underway, is first of all, just to be descriptive, to try to understand and describe what these plans, what policies they set, and how the development regulations work as applied to actual development. And then we also wanted to include an evaluative component to understand how are these working. But to be clear, you know, this wasn't the kind of audit where we had set outcomes that we were measuring against. And so, you know, there's certainly no scoring or pass fail or grades or anything. We just wanted to say, well, generally these are associated with these kinds of outcomes, or, you know, this, you know, could meet some of the requirements or not. And also really exploratory, just looking where are the options currently in the code, what opportunities exist, are there things that maybe are not there that could be added, but really just looking at what options might exist so that we can build on them as this project goes forward. So next, please. And I'll also just say for background, we also were looking statewide at recent legislation, as well as some comparison jurisdictions for case studies, just to get an idea of the environment around housing, and all of that helped inform our audit. But I won't be speaking specifically about those case studies today. So first of all, we took a look at the community framework plan. As you know, this was, you know, sort of the foundational piece for the county that helps unite all the different jurisdictions in a 50-year vision. Most notable aspect for housing has to do with this long-term goal around providing for a variety of housing, that no single housing type is to exceed 75% of new dwelling units, which means that the remaining 25% can provide for greater diversity of housing types. And so, in practice, this has traditionally meant that, single family is that 75%, and all the other housing types that we're looking at, can make up that remaining 25%. And you saw from some of Tyler's slides that, that's not inconsistent with the housing variety that exists in the county right now. But as we look to the future and think about, how we map those different housing types to the housing needs, both the current underproduction and future needs, it might be useful to take another look at that and see how those numbers align. I think it's important to point out that, it's a minimum of 25% that is a variety, that is greater diversity. So there's certainly no conflict with this existing goal. There just might be room for, considering how do we evaluate if 25% is enough, or, how we create opportunities to meet those needs. So go ahead to the next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned, as classical planners, the next thing we wanted to take a look at is the comprehensive growth management plan and evaluate the land use and housing elements in particular. And this plan really, I would say, puts you in a good position to provide a variety of housing types, variety of densities, locations, affordability of housing. So as well as understanding the community context, certainly a housing project. And so I won't be talking about it too much today, but this idea that housing needs to be in communities supported by public facilities, schools, community design, transportation, parks, all those pieces, access to, commercial goods and services, jobs, transit, and other transportation options, all those pieces come together, to make it more than just a housing unit. And so the plan certainly sets some strong policy directions for that. And we didn't see, a lot of, we saw opportunities there and not a lot of concerns about changes that might be needed to support any greater housing variety. So go ahead. The next piece that we looked at is the Highway 99 sub-area plan that comes out of, and helps implement that comprehensive plan. So this was done in 2008. I know a lot of you were involved in this or are familiar with it. And it is broadly spanning, a range of commercial, residential, and mixed-use areas throughout this area, or sub-area, I should say. And what I think there's a lot of interesting, detailed, I'd say technical work that went into this plan that really builds on a strong community vision. And we wanted to, in our review, really focus in on the residential pieces. So there's these multifamily, mixed residential, and single family areas highlighted in the plan. Those are, and just understand better how the residential aspects of the plan get implemented. And I think what we're trying to, really understand for particularly these single family areas and some of the mixed residential, which is where you see some diversity of townhomes or other small apartments types of uses, is what is this plan adding to those areas above and beyond the base zoning? So I think that it's more clear, certainly along the Highway 99 corridor, the commercial, the mixed use standards, but specifically in some of these single family areas, is this plan adding, is it, what else are they adding in terms of both the quality of development that gets done, as well as are there any impacts on quantity of housing? Are we seeing that it helps support development, or perhaps adds so much complexity that it discourages developers? That's still some work that we need to have done. Just from reading through the plan, I'd say that on its face, the form-based code certainly supports a variety of housing. If anything, it's adds more variety than the underlying code. But there's certainly places, particularly the single family areas, where it just defaults to the existing code. And so, it will be interesting, I think, as this project goes forward, to see what are the other opportunities to better align the residential options in single family and the mixed residential areas. So go ahead. And then we took a look at the zoning map itself, right? Get out your box of crayons and start coloring. We've got 15 residential zoning districts to implement the 3 comprehensive plan designations. So a lot of different options, but when it all adds up, what we see is sort of this similar theme you've heard in terms of how many units we have and what the needs are, that there's an awful lot of low density land, right? We're looking at 89% of the acres are zoned for low density, both built and unbuilt. And then when we focus in on that VBLM, on the buildable land that's been identified in that model, 84% of the residential land is in that low density category. So there's sort of two opportunities that stand out there. One is that, this is where the majority of land is. So any strategies that we might be looking at in terms of housing variety, need to look at these low density areas. And then of course, the other strategy or opportunity is, are there ways to change, the slices of the pie here? And is there a need for, more medium or high density land in order to create some additional housing options? But I think that those are sort of the 2 main strategies as we think about the zoning map. Go ahead. And then we get into, sort of broad look at the different housing types, right? That's a lot of the policy direction that we get from the comprehensive plan, providing for the variety, as well as what we're hearing anecdotally in our stakeholder outreach and what you're hearing, from ECO in terms of housing needs. And so this table is arranged generally, the zones increase in density as it goes down, and the housing types, increase in intensity as you go left to right. And so matching those 2 things up, what we're really looking for is sort of a solid diagonal band of green. Those are the permitted uses across the middle of this table. And, you more or less, you can see the beginnings of that here. But I think that there are some opportunities to strengthen that band of green, for lack of a, better way to explain it briefly. Looking at ways that some of the review requirements, that's the yellow where there's additional requirements, digging into those to see what the impacts are on housing development, if they could be simplified, or if they are in fact, providing valuable fine tuning through that review process. And then also, not shying away from, we're looking at lifting some prohibitions to expand how many housing types are available, but it's also important that certain housing types should be limited in certain areas so that other housing types, are more feasible. So, classic example, right, the upper right and lower left corners of this table, we would expect, single family detached to be prohibited in the highest density zones because it's not compatible, and it could, compete with some of the multifamily. Likewise, we wouldn't look for multifamily, large scale, high density development to be permitted in the lowest density single family zones. So, judicious use of prohibited use is also important. Okay, let's keep going. I see we got to pick up the pace to get through these. So we also looked sort of through the 3 main categories of zones, the low density zones. As I mentioned, this is, the vast majority of zoned land. And what we're finding is that the density standards here and the minimum lot sizes, those work together. And they really are having some limitations on the number, variety, and affordability of homes that can be permitted here. And particularly if we are looking at the opportunity to add middle housing, it would really not be compatible with the densities that are currently required in these zones. But on the other hand, the form standards, the lot development standards in terms of how much lot coverage and building envelopes, as you see illustrated here, there's plenty of building envelope area to develop middle housing if those are types that we are interested in. So the constraints are not on the lot, the constraints are what's in the code in terms of density and housing types permitted. Go ahead. And then when we look at the medium density zones, that's where we're seeing a lot of we'd expect to see a lot of townhouses as we're seeing here. But we're also seeing, a lot of pressure here for the smaller lot single family development. And, Eco could speak to this, Tyler could speak a little bit more, but what I understand anecdotally, the dynamics are, that there are opportunities to create small lot single family detached. And because that's such a strong market, it's hard for some of the other middle housing types like townhouses, to be as competitive. So there's a greater variety of housing, some great opportunities here. Also, the maximum densities cause some limitations here, in part because they're not exactly lined up with minimum lot sizes. Go ahead. And then when we get into the high density zones, that's where we would expect more of our traditional, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't guess right about this slide. So notable thing that we see in the low density and medium density zones is that middle housing, that's your duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, cottage housing, cluster, and possibly courtyard apartments, is that there's really limited opportunities, either because they're not permitted or because there are other restrictions in the code, or some of them like triplex, quadplex, courtyard apartments, are just not outright permitted. As Oliver mentioned, there are definitely some positive changes to the ADU and cottage housing standards that have helped to expand opportunities here. So there's definitely some potential here for these options to be part of, the overall housing mix and an increasing part of the overall housing mix. Next. Next we talk about, this is where I was jumping ahead to the apartments here. In the high density zones, we see a really limited land supply for these. And on these properties, densities of 30 to 43 units are permitted. And that's where you see, maybe 3-story, possibly 4-story construction. But there's, just this is a simplified graphic, but there's a lot of demands on these sites in terms of parking and open space that really limit how many units can be built and whether that actual maximum density can be achieved. Go ahead. And perhaps as sort of a spillover from the high density zones, we're not entirely sure of the causality here. Don't ask me, I just read the zoning code, ask Tyler, but we're seeing increased interest in developing residential in the commercial and mixed use zones, but that the opportunities here are fairly limited because the code is focused around vertical mixed use, that's residential above commercial, rather than more of a horizontal where you have, commercial in the front perhaps and ground up residential in the back, or even permitting residential uses outright. Those could be more desired by the market, but there's certainly a balance against, what the comprehensive plan goals are for commercial and mixed use zones and making sure that those areas are fulfilled as well. So some interest, across a variety of platforms. And let's see, go ahead. I think that's the last slide. So I'll just say, there's a range of opportunities that we're finding through our exploratory audit, and I'd be happy to answer a question or two.
Questions of the council?
Madam Chair.
Councilor Brown.
I have a couple of questions regarding the goal that you mentioned, Elizabeth, of 75% of new dwelling units being not of a single housing type. I'll just tell you several of my questions and you can take them however you wish. I'm wondering whose goal is that and how is that either stimulated or enforced? And are we meeting that right now as it relates to the new dwelling units?
Sure. So I would say that goal is a countywide goal that's shared by all the jurisdictions, and Oliver can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but from my work in the county, that was adopted in 1993 as part of the community framework plan for all the jurisdictions, and each jurisdiction within the county has then implemented it as part of their own comprehensive plan. So, and it is definitely, as you say, applies to new housing going forward. So, whatever was built in the past, we can't go back and revise that. We're not necessarily trying to correct the, whatever balance was needed in the past. If I recall Tyler's slide correctly, which is, not the definitive proof, but I believe that the county is, is close to meeting that goal, if not meeting it. And in terms of how it gets promoted going forward, the VBLM is part of it in making sure that there is a balance of urban low and urban high lands that are designated to create the opportunities for that mix of housing, as well as the full suite of comprehensive plan policies supporting a variety of housing and the development code that permits that variety of housing across different zones.
Well, if that's a part of our comp plan now, and we are meeting that goal, then it sounds like we're on target as far as doing what is needed in generating that housing diversity. Would you say that is what is reflected by achieving that goal?
Yeah, I think that what I wanted to highlight is just that, that's a goal that's been on the books since 1993. And so, here we are in 2021, and, certainly that we have this opportunity to take another look and say, hey, if we're meeting this, is this still meeting all of our needs? Are there additional strategies? Is there, sort of a new growth target that's needed, particularly coming out of ECO's work as we map the future housing needs? So, as I wanted to highlight, you can meet or exceed 25. So there's absolutely no conflict with the goal as stated. But just making sure that, as we're taking this comprehensive look, that we're setting our targets to meet what our needs are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have nothing to add. Elizabeth, you covered it well. Councillor Baumann and councillors, that goal used to be 60-40, 60%. The original community framework plan policies had 60-40. As we looked at what has been happening since the plan was adopted in 93, I believe maybe in 1998 or 95, I can't remember the exact year, the cities and the counties looked at what was happening on the ground and amended that goal to 75-25. And Elizabeth is correct that as we looked at this is the relationship between the buildable lands and this work, as we look at what has been happening on the ground, it appears that that 75-25 goal is being met. And as Elizabeth indicated, the 25% variety of housing type can come in a form of townhouse, condominium, duplex, triplex. Some cities are meeting that in terms of townhouses. Not a whole lot of cities and the counties are building triplex, fourplex, and all of that. But I think the 25% can be met through multi-family, duplex, townhouses, and condominiums. So it appears that we are meeting that. Now, going forward, this is where the community and the council can say, do you want to change that goal to something lower than 75-25? That's going to be a policy call. When you're talking about variety of housing type, do you want to up that 25% variety to maybe 30? I don't know. But this information is hopefully will inform the council. I know that other communities are also looking at housing options like Commerce, Richfield, Vancouver, and Battleground. So I don't know what they will come up with, but I'm anticipating that they will also be coming up with some recommendation to look at the variety of housing options that they're providing within their community, or they would like to provide within their community going forward.
Thanks, Oliver. That's informative. Appreciate it.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I do.
Councilor
Thank you. So this is great work showing us the enormous challenge we have. I hear words of infill and redevelopment, and to me, those are terms of art for annexed cities. We don't want to get to a point of paving over paradise, as Joni Mitchell sang many years ago. We need a mix. We want to preserve our rural areas. We had unbridled development in the 80s across the nation without the benefit of smart planning. And so we do have a lot of sprawl. We have rural centers. We have a lot of development where infrastructure is not kept up. And, you know, people, it's natural. People want things to stay the way they are. We just had in the paper today some public outcry about apartment buildings going in, and we've certainly seen some areas in the unincorporated area that are getting overburdened with higher densities. You know, to change densities is something that's really disruptive. And we experienced that in Oregon not too long ago, where they were changing the density, and there's a widespread public outcry out in the area that was unincorporated. So what I want to get to here is I'm hoping that one, we identify the needs in each category of housing, that we can bring affordability to bear for all segments of society, and that we can get you mentioned one sub area that you studied. What I'm hoping that we get to an area where, okay, where are the places to put in this higher density? Where can we put condominiums and apartment buildings where it won't overburden our infrastructure and won't change the density so dramatically that people will rebel against it? You know, we have these rural centers, we have areas throughout the county where there is a fair amount of density. We don't want to end up with the county of Vancouver. You know, that's, you know, like San Francisco, the city and county of San Francisco. I'm hoping to preserve our rural areas as much as we can. So are we going to get to some fidelity where you can help us pinpoint where we need to make these changes, where we can put in some higher density and some medium density that will blend and not be so upsetting to the current population?
My response to that, go ahead, Elizabeth, and then I will chime in.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, there's just a range of strategies from the whole consultant team, and, you know, Jackie and Jenna and all of us will be working together with the advisory committee, and council feedback on policy is really welcome here as well. That, you know, we have a whole range of strategies available to us right now, you know, in terms of, you know, as you say, looking for some particular areas that might be best suited for medium and higher density, or whether it's about gradually integrating, you know, lower density opportunities more broadly, things like ADU or cottage housing, you know, where we, you know, one of the opportunities is that there is such a broad base of low density housing. And so, you know, a couple duplexes here or there across such a broad base could help, you know, produce some of the numbers to provide that variety to meet those affordability needs and diversity of housing for different households and lifestyles. You know, but then certainly, you know, finding a few good places for higher density apartments could develop, you know, provide a large number of units, you know, through one particular action. So it'll be really interesting to see what mix of strategies becomes most feasible and most of interest, and what policy direction we hear.
And I will agree. I think what both Steve, Tyler, and Elizabeth is sharing with us is the analysis, existing conditions, and recognizing that the need exists. And then we are going to be working with the advisory group to begin conversation based on these facts. How could this analysis and assessment in terms of the audit help us to begin to address the need and where opportunities may exist? We may look at certain transportation corridors and say, yeah, that may be where opportunities to exist. You know, this project, if I may, councillors, it's not about increasing density. It's just about where are opportunities and what strategies can we employ to provide or add to a variety of housing types. That's I think what this project is about. It's not focusing on increasing density. Where do opportunities exist now? You look at the landscape in terms of how the area is zoned. Are there opportunities to make some changes? That's what this information is providing us, and hopefully the consultant team, staff, and the advisory group will begin conversation. And I think we're going to get into that in terms of the remaining slides on how we then begin to use this information to inform us in terms of the strategies and opportunities that may come out in the form of a recommendation for council to consider.
Okay, if there are additional slides, let's go ahead and do that because we are running behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I'll just take 1 or 2 minutes to wrap up here. If we could go to the next slide, we wanted to show you our next steps. Jackie mentioned earlier that we are just wrapping up phase 2 and moving into phase 3, where we're going to begin developing our recommendations. We're going to start by casting a wide net, looking at a broad variety of strategies, and through an iterative process with the advisory group and the community, narrow those down to the ones that are we think will be the most impactful and are the best fit for Clark County. So to the extent that this phase does involve pretty significant community engagement, if we could go to the next slide, please. The public participation plan, which I believe you saw at a previous meeting, identifies a variety of possible activities that we could engage in or use to engage the community. And we know that we are going to hold a virtual public kickoff meeting presenting some of the same information we presented to you today. We're looking at May 11th or 12th for that meeting. And from there, we're just going to be exploring a variety of these other opportunities to both educate and engage community members in this conversation. And so going forward, if counselors have any recommendations there, we welcome those as well. And that's the end of our presentation for today. Thank you.
Okay, I know this is going to be an ongoing conversation. Are there questions that the council has at this point that you would like to ask or comments that you would like to make with regard to this presentation?
Chair.
Councilor Hintz.
Yeah, just really briefly, I really appreciated this, and there's a lot of great material in all of the other supplemental materials that are on the project website. Encourage folks, especially in the community, to take a look at that and get a much broader picture. The question that I would have for the team is if there is anything that you need from us today. Otherwise, I look forward to hearing more about this as it goes, and especially about the community input part. Thank you.
I think we are, sorry, Steve, I was going to say that I think we got a lot of questions and comments, which were great throughout the presentation. So we are really appreciative of that. And feel free to reach out to staff if questions come up after this meeting. We're happy to get you the information you need. And then if you have any suggestions for us for our next phase of, recommendation development, or if you have any comments on as we prepare for that, send them our way, as well as our community engagement ideas. So you'll be seeing information coming up for that first kickoff meeting with the public, and we hope to also get some CVTV coordination going as well. So those are upcoming.
Thank you, Jackie. Appreciate it. Any other comments?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for this presentation. A lot of good work, and a lot of work to comprehend and work with. And I'm glad to see that there's going to be other opportunities for input, etc. So we look forward to seeing And any of us, like Jackie mentioned, if we have questions or comments or recommendations to this group, send them to Jackie, and so that we can kind of get on, so that our team can look at that as well. So if there's nothing else, we will adjourn this work session. Thank you once again, all of you, for your time and efforts in this.
Thank you, councillors.
Thank you.
We are going to move on to council time, but I am going to allow for another 5-minute break.